I'm going to start with one gradient. I'm going to use the same gradient mask for both, and then we're going to use a hue, saturation, lightness to differentiate them from each other. So let's start with the big leaves. I'm going to come into my gradient editor. I'm going to click on the gradient itself, and I'm going to pick some colors I like. I'm not going to use the picker. We're not going to make a complicated gradient. I'm going to keep it simple. All right, that's good enough for now. Honestly, I always get hung up on this because I get very persnickety with it. So I need to stop now. Yeah, I mean, if I was doing this for real, I'd work more on these colors, but you get the idea. So you get the colors to how you want them. If you want to use two separate gradients for each one of these, you can. You know, it really depends on the effect you want. I'm not going to bother because it's the same tree, it's the same leaves. It's just one set is going to be further back away from the light, and the other one isn't. So it's all going to be more or less the same thing. So we've got the smaller version, we've got the bigger version. Now, here's the thing, though. We're going to blend them together, but we don't want like this green background where we don't have leaves. So we're going to have to take an extra step and cut them out. I'm going to use this small mask right here to cut out the background. So our little leaves are cut out, and then we can use another blend just like we did the last time with the bigger mask. Yeah, that's the right one. But instead of plugging in a solid background, we're plugging in a background that's also been cut out. So we have now everything except for this stuff. This is because this material was not designed for this mesh and the UV. I just took the mesh and I just slapped the UVs up on this material. So we're getting seams and it's not matchy, but it's more fun than looking at a cube. Yeah, so the leaves are enormous and the wrong size, but I'm kind of liking what I see as far as everything else goes. Our color isn't quite done because we still have to add the color for our deep background. I'll make a little bit more room here. I'm going to take this same, actually might as well take both of them. I'm going to duplicate these guys, and what we're going to do is take that and we are going to get a normal to height. Let's use the high quality. Actually, probably don't even need the HQ. We can just do the regular one. And we'll plug this into here. So again, it's working off of the same color scheme. And we're going to really drop this one down. Well, let's start up here. Let's drop this guy down first so we know what we're dealing with. So I'm going to make this color darker using the HSL node. We're going to have to, yeah, I want to cut this one first. We're going to, right, so we're now filling up these areas here. I don't want it, I kind of want it mushy. So I'm going to use another mask. I think this will do, just in case I'm going to get a levels node. I'm off my notes now. I'm doing this different, so I'm kind of playing it by ear. Yeah, you know, but I just realized that it's not the color I want to cut out, it's the opacity. This color we're going to leave solid because we want that background to have a color, and then we're just going to be fading it in and out. So my bad there. Let's get this darker. So those black areas have some color a little bit, but they're really dropping back. And you know what? I think, yeah, we'll worry about it later. I might want a finer mask. I'm thinking if we can have maybe something better to do the height to the normal to height off of. We'll leave it for now. I'm just worried about these flat areas. We might just move it around like we did with the other one. Let's see how it looks first. Okay, so our main opacity is this. And we have these white areas that we want to keep them white. We want to overlay this onto this grayer thing, which is going to let, you know, some of the color stay. But we're going to use it its own self as a mask. And that's what it gives us. Yeah, let's try it the simple way first. Just going to bring this up so that I don't really have any pure black areas, so there's a little bit of color somewhere. And let's see how we like that. Well, let's hook up our color too. And our opacity. Yeah, these seams are because this material doesn't belong to this actual mesh. But we're starting to get stuff going on in here. It's got a normal, so once we add color to it, it gives us an interesting effect. I don't want to mess with it too much right now because we're going to make these leaves a lot smaller. But that might be a mask we're going to need to do a little bit more work on. But I'm going to leave it alone for now because we might make like we might just transform it down a little bit just to give a more even sort of noise in the background. But for now, we're going to call that done-ish. And let's finish up the rest of these outputs. All right, you know what? I'm going to use this one as a height to normal because then I can use it again for my ambient occlusion. And we'll adjust this mask because it's just going to save us having to do a separate node, and I think it'll work because I don't think it really matters too much what we use for here. And let's make that a little less crazy so we can bring the height depth way down. I mean, these are leaves, right? So, you know, there's not a whole lot of occlusion happening. And then the other thing I want to do is I want to set this GPU optimization on because it's going to make a big difference in the way it processes. And we can replace that white placeholder, and that's giving us a nice occlusion. What do we have left here? We have roughness and scattering. Okay, so the roughness, yeah, let's use this same mask and fool around with it a little bit. So we've got our normal to height. Let's get another levels node. Let's get an invert grayscale. Actually, let's do that the other way around. And because we don't want it all these flat things, because this is going to give, those background leaves are going to get very flat for us. Let's do this in 2 steps, I think. I mean, it's the, you know, the roughness isn't terribly important here. And there's like a million different ways to do it. It's just a question of deciding which masks you want to use. I mean, it's always better to kind of reuse things down the chain, not try to grab things up from back here, but kind of keep things going in a daisy chain. That's going to give you overall the most efficient way of doing this, processing-wise. Like I said, I'm off my notes right now, and I'm not putting a great deal of thought into how I'm doing it as far as the details go, because the method is going to be the same. Okay, all right. I'm not nuts about how flat this is looking as far as the variety of roughnesses going on. I'm going to see what happens if I do this. Again, I'm not going to stress this too much because, like, I'm off my notes and you guys pretty much get the idea of how to do this material. I mean, the important thing is cutting out in the heights and all of this. But I want just some variety in the roughnesses, so maybe not have them match exactly. I think I like that much better. And it's kind of, you know, for the moment, let's just see what happens if we look at it a cube. Yeah, I'm okay with that. I mean, we're going to be really distorting it, so I don't think there's any point in getting like details of veins and stuff in here because we're going to be really manipulating it. So just kind of an overall thing. I just don't want it completely flat. So yeah, I'm good with that. Let's bring our, well, you know, let's finish up the material and then we'll bring the tree back in. So we have our scattering left over, and that's easy because we've already done our color. And all we really need to do is pass it through that scattering mask we made. And because it's a color, well, I think it'll read it as a black just to make sure. I'm going to stick a color in here. It would probably read that checkerboard as a black anyway, but that's our scattering. And we can't see it here, but this is going to give the effect of light kind of going through those leaves. So this actually looks pretty good right now. Kind of vaguely see their shapes, and it's only really the top ones that are getting the most light. So yeah, that looks good. Right, so that's the material pretty much done except for creating an input parameter that's going to allow us to tile it. Make a little bit of room. I'm going to double click on the graph and let's make a tiling parameter. We're going to make this an integer 1 and we'll call it tiling. We'll make the default 1. We'll make the minimum 1 as well because we don't want people going down to 0. It'll give them nothing. No, I'm going to make it 5. And I'm going to clamp it because I really don't want people going down to 0. And then all we need to do is get a transform node. And we're going to just duplicate it out. But let's put a function in here. We're going to go into the transform matrix. And if you haven't seen this done before, again, I have other tutorials that deal with this, and I will link them up in the description. So if you haven't done this, I would recommend looking at that other video first, and then coming back to this one. So we're going to click Edit. Oh no, we're going to click the function, and we're going to create an empty function, and then we're going to come into the graph. So we're going to want to end up with a float 4 output. So we're going to need a vector float 4. We're also going to need a couple of vector float 2s because we have to set up that, you know, float 4 matrix. And the pattern goes number, 0, 0, number. And that number is going to be our variable. So our tiling number, I must have done that before. I guess I have 2 of them in there. Yeah, I was fooling around with stuff before. But this is floats here, and this is an integer. So we're going to actually also need to cast this to a float. So that just converts that integer into a float. And we're going to plug that into the spot that's actually going to tile. So it'll tile according to these numbers. And then we convert that to a float 4, and we'll set that as our output node. So this one's all set up. Let's take a look at our color to make sure it's working. We'll plug in our color. We'll come into our main graph. We're double clicking. We're going into our, yeah, well, somewhere in there I've got it. It might be because I've got tiling on the test shrubbery one. Who knows? As we move this number up, so as we move the number up, that tiles down. So that works. And we need 6 of them. So we've already got our color. We've got our opacity. We've got our ambient occlusion. Normal, height. Yeah, okay. Roughness. And scattering. And let's try it on our little tree. So I'm going to come back into my Explorer. I'm going to get our shrubbery, close this down, get our shrubbery object. It's got its materials on it already because they've been assigned. And then we can come in here and change our tiling. Oh, I think we're going to have to resend the output. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I'm pretty good with that. I think the one thing I'm not entirely good with is that deep, deep background, I think I'd like to change that. And the color is fine. It's really the opacity that we want to look at. What I'm not liking about it is just like super even, and I'd like this to be much more granular. I think the simplest thing to do, because this isn't a bad pattern, I think the simplest thing to do is just take a transform 2D node and stick it in here and bring this size down a little bit. Yeah, that's better. Let's see what happens if we tile it down just a little bit more. Yeah. So that's our material done. Let's export it out to Unreal and see what happens. So I'm going to hit the publish button, and the first time around it's going to make me, you know, I can just assign where I want it to go. So I'm going to call it shrubbery, and I'll save it out to the folder. I can keep subsequently publishing it out with those very same settings by hitting this one, which has now become available to me. So we're going to go and take a look at this in Unreal. Alrighty, so we're back in Unreal, and this was my test material. So we're going to go ahead and import the new substance we made. If you're going to be using Substance in Unreal, you need to have the plugin enabled, and you can get the plugin at the store. So make sure that you have the plugin enabled if you're going to be using Substance inside of Unreal. I'm going to import shrubbery. Oh, you know what? It's not going to like that. I'm going to change the name of this thing because it's not going to like the fact that it's got a duplicate name. And we're going to allow it to create its own material. It's just going to save us linking up a bunch of stuff. We're going to add to it though. Going to import, and here's our shrubbery material. Now before we actually go into the material, we want to go into the instance, not the instance factory, but the instance, and we want to set some things up in there. First of all, I want to have my output size as 2K. And then the other thing I want to do is I want to enable my scattering and my height, which aren't automatically enabled, and it's annoying that every single time it decides to come back to the content browser, but I don't know that there's anything you can do about that, and I'm going to save that. I'm going to come back to my content browser. I'm going to go into my material, and it's mostly set up for me. You have to do some things to it, but like most of the nodes are set up, so it saves a lot of time. First thing we want to do is we want to set up the actual shaders here. So rather than default lit, we're going to go with two-sided foliage, which is going to give us that subsurface color. And then we are going to go into the tessellation, because right now if we can't, there's no height map right now, it's not going to work. And we're going to do PN triangles, which is the more complex form of the tessellation, and that opens up that stuff for us. So that's the material itself done. Now we're short a couple of nodes because it didn't automatically populate those two nodes that we didn't check. So it didn't give us our scattering and it didn't give us our height. I'm going to save myself some trouble. I'm just going to hit Control W and duplicate this out, and I'll make this one height, and I will replace roughness here with height. And then I'm going to hit Control W again, and we're going to replace this might give me a, let's see if this gives me a hard time. We'll find out in a second. Where's my scattering? There. Yeah, it went ahead and changed this one too, didn't it? Yeah, one's a color, one's a black and white, so I did that. And we'll change the name. That was complicated. Let's plug the scattering node in where it belongs, and that's that done. So that's subsurface color. Now the height is going to require a little bit of extra work because we actually have to set it up so that it does world displacement for us. I'm going to hit the number 1. I'm going to press down number 1 and click rather, and that's going to give me a constant, and then I'm going to right click and convert to a parameter. And the first parameter I'm going to do is going to be distance. What did I do here? That's going to be sort of the actual height, you know, like how high I want it. I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to hold down the number 1 and click, and then I'm going to right click, convert to parameter, and I'm going to create a tessellation multiplier, and we'll set that I'm going to set the default value as 3. What the tessellation multiplier does is it tells Unreal how fine that mesh is, as far as when it tessellates, how fine that mesh is. So the higher this number is, the more exact your height map is going to be. And now we just have to create the actual height. I'm going to hold down M and click. I'm going to do that twice because I'm going to need 2 multiply nodes. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply the height with the distance. I'm going to right click. I'm going to get a vertex normal world space. And now we're going to tell the vertices how much to offset. So we're going to use the second multiplication node to multiply that world offset by our height information. And we're going to plug that into our world displacement. So currently my distance, my default value is set to 0, so I don't know, let's set it to something. So what happens if I do, I don't know, 1.5. Oops. Yeah, and maybe move this up a little bit. Save that. And let's take our shrubbery material and slap it up on there. Yeah, there we go. So that's our little cheese. We can move our tiling. You know, if I was going to do this for Unreal, I would make them as a, you know, I would make sure that there was no seams here. Because if you don't have a seam, it's not going to do that. It's only going to do that on seams. Oh, and another thing you could do in the material, I'm sure this is the right one. Yeah. Another thing you can do on the material, you highlight the material, you go into your tessellation, and you could set it for crack-free displacement, which helps a little bit with the cracks. Make that 5, and we can make this 1. And there we have it. I'm pretty pleased with these little trees, because you see what's happening is that it's because it's not solid around the edge here, you kind of get this breakup. You know, it's different from the trees, the pictures that the picture that I was linked to. But honestly, I'm kind of pleased with it. So there we are. Let's build the lighting and see what it looks like with the lights built. All right. So I think that's a pretty good cartoon tree. Yeah, pretty good little cartoon tree. You know, if you wanted to, you could get more exact with the colors, obviously, but I think as a general idea, this gets the job done. So you can expand on what you've learned here to make your very own tree. Well, I hope that's been helpful, and I will see you in the next video.